and we are going to finish this great book of Jonah, this prophet. And it's been quite a surprise, and it's been fun for me to do Jonah because it brought up a new perspective of what the significance and the importance is of this, not just this little story of somebody that was having a problem with his commission and God had to straighten him out. It's much, much more deeper than that. Oh, what did I just do? Okay, never mind. So, since this is, now we're going to conclude Jonah. We know what happened with Jonah. We know that he was a prophet that came in so early that all the examples that he had before him were really the former prophets, which had a completely different mission. When you look at the prophets, you look at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses, and Samuel, and all this Elijah and Elisha. That was a whole different type of prophecy that was being done. Now all of a sudden comes Jonah, and God tells him to do the unthinkable. Go to the most horrible place in the planet that he could think of, that he wanted to stay away from. I can picture Jonah being a man that despised violence, a man that wanted nothing but just the peace of God, the blessings of God, and wanted to bring his people the message that God had for them. And all of a sudden, God tells him, go to Nineveh, that great city. Mm-hmm. And he calls him the great city. And Jonah is thinking, great, for what? You got to remember what was going on with the Assyrian Empire at this time, which is today Mosul in Iraq. And what they were doing was no different than all the other empires. They had a little bit of a difference, a little different personalities, just like different people have different personalities. Well, Nineveh, they figured out that the best way to become strong was to terrorize by terror. Make sure that anybody that you come against knows that, buddy, when I get to you, if you make me come to you, I'm going to make you wish that you had never been alive. You're going to wish that you had never met me. So what happened was, nations, once they set the example of a few nations, and then those nations were given all their gold and whatever produce to Nineveh, it became very wealthy. So what was happening is Nineveh didn't have to, the Assyrians didn't have to go and conquer somebody anymore. All they had to do was nations that they had not conquered yet, get them to fight among each other. And so what they did is they would, like you saw that with Israel, and you many times were I'm sorry, anything?
No, I was trying to turn that a little bit because you were out.
Okay, yeah. So what was happening is Israel will contact the Assyrians and say, "Hey, I'm having problems with the Ammonites. We'll send you gold and whatever you want. We'll be under your. So we submit to you and give you whatever you want. You fight against those enemies that are attacking me." And Assyria would say, "Okay, well, if you're the highest bidder, I'll do that." So they would attack, or the problem most of the time they didn't have to attack. All they have to do is tell the Ammonites, "Hey, I'm coming against you. Are we going to do this the easy way, or are we going to do it the hard way?" So that was kind of like the game that was being played. And as they were doing that, they were expanding until they became a world empire, so to speak. Because this is before the ones that Daniel prophesied about. But that was the background of what Jonah had to deal with. And that's what we find ourselves in when we see Jonah. So now we know that Jonah wants to flee God. God gets a hold of him, and then he gives us a gospel. Even before he ever got to Nineveh, we already had the gospel already laid out. Mm-hmm. He died, was 3 days in the belly of a fish. Now I'll give some of the flexibility in interpretation. Okay, so, his body did not see corruption, just like Jesus' body did not see corruption. That doesn't mean that he was alive. He was in Sheol. Because I hear so many people interpret that he was somehow alive in that belly. No, he was in Sheol. And then he was raised from the dead.
Yes.
That's the gospel right there.
Exactly.
And that's the sign that Jesus told the Capernaum and some of the Israel during his ministry. That's the only sign I'm going to give you, because your problem is unbelief.
Yes.
And boy, does God hate unbelief.
Yes.
And I tell you what, I pray about that. Lord, if there's any unbelief, I want to get rid of it right now, because I know that irritates you. It's more important to me than even to take a shower today. As important as that is. So we have that. Now we know what happened. He goes to Nineveh. In Nineveh, obviously God was working behind the scenes, because these cruel people don't just get on sackcloth and ashes because somebody's walking in telling them that in 40 days and your city will be overturned. I can imagine the message gets through. There's this guy that came out of a fish, and he's heading this way. They consult their magicians. The magician said, we looked at our method of determining what's happening, and it's saying we have never seen this before. We're going to be destroyed. Then he goes to the astronomers. What is the stars are telling us? King, this is the first time we see this alignment, and this is not good. We're going to be destroyed. These guys didn't just listen to Jonah just because there was something about Jonah that looked convincing. I believe that it was God behind the scenes the whole entire way. Now Jonah gets in there. Now here's a little bit of a different interpretation here. Was he preaching in Nineveh 1 day, 3 days, or 40 days? Take your pick. We're not told. All we know is that he did what he was told to do. He gave the message that he was told to give to the Ninevites. The Ninevites obeyed God. Something that Jonah was still having a problem with, because he had obeyed him, but his attitude needed to be changed. And now that brings us into chapter 4, and that has to do with the second message of the gospel. Except this one is not the death and resurrection of Jonah himself, but what happened with the gourd that was that God brought up.
That's to deal with his pity.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a different situation here that concludes the prophecy of Jonah. And let me see, I'm just going to, because I don't have Sandrita, I'm going to have to put up with my reading. And that's, we start with 4:1, and I'll try to go through this as quick as I can. And that is the interpretation from Dr. Baruch Corman. And this was evil to Jonah, a great evil. And he was very angry. You know, if you get angry about something, stop and try to find out, why is something making you mad? I was telling Astrid last night about Richard Dawkins. And he was having not a debate, but he wanted to try to talk this fellow atheist back into atheism that had left atheism to Christianity. And he was trying to be calm until he didn't have any more argument to convince this lady to come back to atheism. So he started cussing and doing what he likes to do. Well, in debate, the moment you get angry and the moment you start name calling, you might as well, you may not realize it, but you're just basically throwing a white flag and saying, I lost, I surrendered. You think you're winning the argument because you got mad, but you don't. Well, Jonah was getting mad now. He doesn't know where to go. He can't commit suicide anymore. He's already tried that, and that, you know how that worked out. Extremely difficult. I cannot imagine. He had the worst 2 months of his life right there. And that's all we know about this poor prophet. I'm not poor prophet, because I believe he's a great, great prophet. Given a mission that I don't believe anybody else would have been able to do. Jonah was the man that had to do it. And he did. He did. And we know that. And the Lord said to, this is now verse 4, it says, and the Lord said, do you do well to be angry? I like the way that God deals with us.
Yes.
He doesn't deal with us in our level. He deals with us the way from his level. And his way is much better than ours. And then in 4:6 it says, and the Lord had appointed a gourd. That's like some kind of a plant, like cucumber plant type of thing.
Okay.
They grow very fast. And to go over Jonah. Now remember, Jonah at this time is in the east part of the city. Not by accident, because in biblical prophecy, you go for the judgment of God comes from the east. If you look at the pattern. So he's expecting from the east, he's going to be able to see what's going to happen to Nineveh. He doesn't know at this time if they, he could see. He could see that they're in sackcloth and ashes, but he's probably thinking, they don't mean it.
They can't fool God.
But deep inside, he knows that, you know what? I think they're going to repent, and I'm not going to like this. In fact, he's already upset about that because he's not seeing what he's expecting to see. So the appointed gourd is planned to provide shade for him and to save him from his evilness. It's amazing. The Hebrew word that is used here is evil, ra. And most of our translations don't call it evil. They call it something else. Because they didn't know they just couldn't associate evil with Jonah. But that's what was happening. Well, those are the words that we're using in the Hebrew scripture. And Jonah rejoiced concerning the gourd. Of course, he was very, very happy about that plant. And we know that. That's nothing new. And then we have in verse 7, and Jehovah appointed a worm early in the morning on the next day, and the worm stuck to the gourd, and it withered. Now, this word in Hebrew is not really a worm like the way we associate when you go fishing and you have a worm. No, this was actually more like a grub, and it's tiny, tiny little thing. It takes hundreds of those tola worms or grubs to make that scarlet color that was used for the garment of the priest, of the high priest, and for the tabernacle. And they had to literally go through hundreds and hundreds of those tola worms or grubs. I like to call them grubs because that's what it took to turn the garment red. They didn't have synthetic colors like we have today. Yeah. So it was very special, and if you wore a robe red made of the scarlet color, you had to be rich because nobody could afford it except the very wealthy. Now that is the second gospel. First we had Jonah dying, coming back to life, just like Jesus. Now we have this worm, this tola worm, that does exactly the same thing. And I put a writing on I'll send you later on the Word document, which a write-up on what the tola is and the relationship with tola and the gospel. This little female tola, when she is done with her life and she's ready to give birth to her, to give birth, she will go up a tree or a plant or something like that and attaches herself to it. So let's call it a tree right now because the relationship with Jesus on the tree. She will attach herself to it, and then she starts to feed her young ones with her own body. So they're consuming her while she's attached to this tree. She'll never come down from it again. Jesus was put in the tree, never to come down alive. The same thing with the tola. Then as the process of her giving her life for her offspring, this red fluid starts to come out of her, and she the new young ones now turn crimson red from the mother, from that dye. And also that red crimson color also gets attached to the tree. So that it will remain red after that. So you know when Tola grubs have been on your plant, because you'll see the red spots, and they're really hard to get rid of. They're very, very strong coloring. When she's at that point, she will curl herself, head and tail together, join her together and form the shape of a heart.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Think of Jesus this whole time. Then when the young ones are born, they take off and fly away. New life comes out, and her body now turns white like snow. In fact, it looks almost like snow, because it will start to disintegrate, and little flakes start to come down like snow whenever they talk. Remember, most of the time when you had a Tola situation, you didn't have one little grub there. You had hundreds. That's what kills that thing.
Tree.
And when I say hundreds, maybe thousands. And so that tree or plant all of a sudden looks like snow is coming down. And what people did in those days, they picked up those white flakes, and they make a shellac for wood. It was a type of wood shellac that was made from it. That was the second example of how in Jonah you had the gospel once again through this little thing. Can anybody think of another verse, very important messianic verse, where Tola, the Tola worm is mentioned?
I remember.
Look at Psalm 22.
Yeah.
He said, I am a worm and not a man.
A worm. Yeah.
And how does Psalm 22 begin? My God, why have thou forsaken me? That was even the Jews back then knew that was messianic.
Yes.
They knew it was messianic.
Yes.
Of course, after Jesus, they wanted to undo it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the typical, what people like to do. So there it is, the gospel once again. But this one is to get the attention of Jonah, because Jonah still cannot let go of the fact that God could be merciful to the Ninevites, of all the people on this planet. I think he would have preferred to have been sent to Egypt or the Ammonites or the Moabites, or maybe even the Edomites. And the Edomites they were not exactly they were out there next to the Assyrians as far as the way that, because they were very violent toward. In fact, that's what the word they use for the Edomites right now is Hamas.
Yes.
It's on purpose. That's no accident. They know exactly what that word means.
It
means it's a kind of violence that the Assyrians use to terrorize, and that's how we're going to terrorize you. And one of the latest things that I've heard from Israel this week is a lot of this in Israeli, and Pam, you can probably confirm this, the Israeli military force it's taking its toll on the soldiers. Not just the young ones. In fact, the young ones are dealing better with it than the ones that have been serving in the military, in the Israeli military for a while. They're committing suicide. There's been over 1,000 that committed suicide. They can't take that anymore.
In the United States, 22. In the United States, 22 soldiers per day take their lives.
Wow.
These are American soldiers.
Yes.
Okay, and they're not even.
Imagine what IDF is.
And the IDF is dealing with much worse. I mean, the stuff they have to see every day, and the fear that must be you don't know who's the next person. They look just like you. You take. I've looked at some of these Palestinians. They look just like the Israelis.
Yes.
You can't tell the difference unless they put something on them to.
And they hide behind civilians.
Yeah, yes, of course.
So unfortunately, civilians are being killed.
Yes.
And that has to really mess with with soldiers.
You know, you probably heard me say this story before. Hitler, when he first started doing his extermination of the Jews, and he would go to let's say Latvia, so one of those countries, invade on his way to Russia, he would send the SS out there after the army. They took over a town, they round up the Jews, have them dig these huge trenches, and then they would have the SS soldiers come in and shoot them in the back of the head, and then they drop. They found out, it didn't take very long, they found out that even those SS guys, anti-Semitic, about as demonized as you can be, they had a limit of how many people they could shoot, because they were shooting men, women, and children. And they were just like, hey, you know, I know we want to get rid of the Jews, but hey, you know, this is not going very well. So they knew they couldn't continue that. So what is the next step they did? They drafted middle-aged men that were beyond military age. And they told them, here's a rifle. You don't have to do this, but I want you to shoot those men, women, and children. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can go back home as a coward. You know that most of them went ahead and did it because they didn't want to be labeled a coward. And they also only could shoot so many before they wouldn't do any more. So that is the kind of situation. There's a little rabbit trail there because Hamas is now taking its toll on the Israeli forces. And so we really, when we pray for them, pray for those soldiers that are
Yes.
because they are in such bad need to get out of that and go back to normal life.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine when I was that age having to be dealing with that kind of stuff. We had Vietnam going on. I remember how I thought Vietnam was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. Killing guys in black pajamas that I don't have any farmers. What are we doing out there?
The thing is, with America, all or a majority of our wars have been fought somewhere else.
Yeah.
With the IDF, they're fighting
They're at home.
Yeah. And their families are in danger, and
Yeah.
so they're getting it on all fronts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was what World War II was like. See, World War II was different from all the previous American wars in that civilians were taking such a heavy casualty. Before that, it was just men and battlefields. But then World War II changed all that. But of course, you know, in the Bible, they had already, all this stuff we're talking about was happening a long time ago also. So now we have the gospel once again given to us, given to Jonah, and we don't have. Well, the drama continues, and I'll start with verse 8 to 11. That really concludes the chapter. So we have when the sun arose, of course, and then you had the scorching heat from the east wind. And again, that's all symbolic. From the east comes the judgment, except now the focus is on Jonah. It's no longer on Nineveh. Nineveh has already repented. God has... That was just something that now was not part of the story anymore. And now Jonah becomes the centerpiece once again. And now Jonah knows he cannot commit suicide, so he asked that he might die, and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember. I know that Paul one time, he said that they were having such a difficult time in one of those Asia Minor countries, places that he said that they despaired even of life. It got that tough, and. That's pretty bad when you get to that point. And there's so many people you can reach. That woman that became a Christian after leaving Islam, after leaving atheism, that's what brought her to Christ, to Jesus, because she wanted to die. Mm. She tried to get all the help she could from psychologists and so on to give her a reason to live. And they couldn't. They tried, they couldn't. Finally, one of them just said, "Why don't you turn to Jesus?" And I think I've heard people that have done that. And she said, "Well, I'll do it because I received a note from time from a Christian that said, I don't agree with what you're doing and your views of Christianity, but I want you to know I'm a Christian and I love you." And she said that she forget that. She just couldn't understand that. Why? In Islam, they don't teach you that. And atheists, I don't know, is there any loving atheists? They may be.
They're not taught to love. They're taught to hate from the time.
No, we're talking about the atheists, not the Muslims.
Oh.
The atheists, if they have any love, they didn't get it from atheism. They got it from the Christian culture. Yeah. The one that Richard Dawkins says, I am a cultural, political Christian. That's what he calls himself. He says, I'm an atheist, but I'm a cultural, political Christian, meaning that I don't believe in any of that stuff. I just like being around Christians.
Yes.
And don't send me to a Muslim country because I don't want to live there.
Yeah.
No, that's his own words. Not even my opinion. That's what he keeps telling that. But just in case you haven't heard, Pam or somebody else, he just renounced his position as the head of this atheist organization. Yesterday, did you hear about that? Okay, you heard it. All in the background that he's a scientist and he knows the difference between X and Y chromosomes and he knows the difference. And he said, "What's the matter with you people?
Yes.
You're turning this into another fairy tale, the kind of stuff that I'm telling you that I don't believe in, and now you're doing that."
Doing it, yeah.
And to his credit, he said, "Well, find another stooge because I'm not dealing with this. Go and get some college professor from Harvard or Yale that believes in all this critical theory and woke and all that stuff that's coming down the pike, which is unbelievable nonsense. It's completely unscientific." So we got Jonah in this situation right now where he doesn't want to live anymore. Mm-hmm. But God said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" And he said, "Yes, I do well to be angry." Angry enough to die. I mean, he is really having an issue. And the Lord said, "You pity that plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being one night and perished in one night. You cared more for that." And here we go into the Nineveh part. Should not I pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle, Roxy. Yeah. A lot of people say that there were 100. That means that there were 120,000 people in Nineveh. In fact, if you Google it, you're probably going to get that. I don't believe that, because it said people that don't know their right hand from their left. Who are we talking about? We're talking about infants. How in the world do you think Nineveh, with 120,000 people, are going to rule their world? No, there was a lot more than that. But if you want to choose to believe that what Google tells you, believe it. I take my stand with Dr. Baruch, who says, no, that place it was the largest city in the world at that time. It had about at least 1 million people in there. We don't have the statistics. ISIS destroyed all the archaeological stuff thanks to, 2014 when the American troops came out and so on. It's a disaster. But anyway, so that's the situation with Nineveh.
These verses, though.
Pardon?
These verses, to me, really shows how God is a father, because Jonah is almost like a child pitching a temper tantrum, and God is dealing with him. It really, to me, it shows a father-child relationship.
Well, that is the relationship that God always had with Israel. He was their husband and their father, and Jesus is also our husband. Our husband. I know that's a concept. I know Dallas and I, we would prefer another way of defining it, but basically that is the relationship. And again, I have to defend Jonah. He was put in a very difficult position, and he did what God told him to do, and we don't have the rest of his life, but we can see that God loved Jonah too much to leave him where he was at.
Yes.
Because he was not only going to deliver Jonah from that prison, but he was also going to deliver the rest of us with the message of Jonah, which is the message to all the world. From that time to the end of time, the message of Jonah is going to be relevant. It's not going to go away. And to some people, that's the only message, the only sign that they're going to get.
Yes.
So that concludes Jonah. We had, hopefully, when you look at Amos and Micah and Joel and Hosea and Obadiah, you're going to have a totally different perspective just from the studies that we have been doing. Maybe those are just introductions. Maybe later on, if God lets us continue, because I always pray, what do you want me to do, Lord? Mm-hmm. If you want me to stop, I'll stop. If you want me to do something else, and sometimes that happens. I was going to skip Jonah. That was my original plan until I say, wait a minute. I think that God wants me to do it because I think there's a message here that's very important. And so, Lord willing, we'll continue, and I'll conclude Jonah with that.